I was just another employee at a luxury corporation in Chicago, never imagining I'd be dragged out of the office in front of all my colleagues, humiliated and fired by the CEO's wife herself. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I held a secret that could crush their entire empire, a secret worth $200 million. That morning started like any other, with me adjusting my blazer in the elevator's reflection, completely unaware that by noon, my carefully constructed ordinary life would shatter into 1,000 pieces. My name is Emily Rhodes, 32 years old, and I've spent the last 3 years carefully building a life in Chicago that looked nothing like the one I'd left behind in Ohio. Every morning, I'd take the L train from my modest apartment in Lincoln Park to the gleaming towers of the Loop, where Asterian Capital occupied 40 floors of steel and glass that scraped the clouds. To anyone watching, I was just another mid-level manager in a sea of ambitious professionals, clutching my coffee and checking emails on my phone as I navigated the morning rush. The Asterian building was a monument to excess. The lobby alone could humble you. Italian marble floors so polished you could fix your lipstick in their reflection. A waterfall feature that cost more than most people's homes, and security guards in suits that probably outpriced my entire wardrobe. The executive elevator, which I'd only ridden twice in my tenure, was lined with genuine leather and had a dedicated operator. This was the kind of place where power wasn't just wielded, it was displayed, worn like designer clothing, suffocating anyone who dared to breathe without permission. I worked on the 32nd floor in strategic development, a deliberately vague department name that essentially meant we evaluated potential acquisitions and investment opportunities. My desk sat in a corner with a view of the Chicago River, a small privilege I'd earned through long nights and sharp instincts. The office itself was open-plan modern, the kind designed to promote collaboration, but really just eliminated privacy. Glass walls everywhere, so everyone could see everyone, judge everyone, measure their worth against everyone else's perceived success. My colleagues were a predictable mix of Ivy League graduates, trust fund babies playing at careers, and a handful of us, the outsiders who'd clawed our way in through sheer determination. I fell into the last category, or so they believed. They saw my Ohio State degree, heard my slight Midwestern accent that I'd never quite shaken, noticed my Nordstrom rack suits among their Prada and Armani. What they didn't see was how carefully orchestrated this whole performance was. The truth was, I could have bought my way onto the executive floor. Hell, I could have bought the entire floor. But that wasn't why I was here. After my mother died 4 years ago, leaving me with a grief so heavy I couldn't breathe and a fortune so vast I couldn't comprehend it, I needed something real. Something that wasn't connected to the tech company, shares she'd held since the early days. Shares that had multiplied into an absurd fortune when Google acquired the company for $2 billion. My 10% stake, a gift from the founder who'd been my mother's best friend, had set me up for 1,000 lifetimes. But money without purpose is just numbers on a screen. So I came to Chicago, created a careful history of middle management positions, and inserted myself into Asterian Capital. I wanted to understand how the other side of money worked. Not the Silicon Valley disruption side, but the old money, the institutional power, the kind that had been crushing people like my mother for generations before she got lucky. The Asterian executives treated the office like their personal kingdom. They'd sweep through the floors in their perfectly tailored suits, leaving clouds of expensive cologne and whispered anxieties in their wake. At the apex sat CEO Richard Halston, a man who wore his 58 years like a Swiss watch, precise, expensive, and always reminding you of its presence. His wife, Claudia, was a different creature entirely. Where Richard was calculated corporate precision, Claudia was old money entitlement wrapped in Chanel and barely contained rage. She didn't officially work for Asterian, but she appeared often enough, inserting herself into meetings, second-guessing decisions, treating employees like her personal servants. I'd made the mistake of being competent. In my 3 years at Asterian, I'd identified 2 unicorn investments that had paid off spectacularly, earning the company $40 million in profits. Richard had noticed. He'd started requesting my input directly, bypassing my immediate supervisors. He'd even invited me to present to the board twice, an honor usually reserved for senior VPs. That's when Claudia started noticing me too. The first sign of trouble came during a quarterly review meeting. Richard had asked me to present our analysis on a potential acquisition in the renewable energy sector. I'd spent weeks preparing, knowing this could be a $300 million decision. As I stood before the boardroom's floor-to-ceiling windows, outlining market projections with practiced precision, I caught Claudia watching me from her unofficial seat at the table she always insisted on attending, though she held no official position. "Miss Rhodes makes an excellent point about the regulatory advantages," Richard said, leaning forward with genuine interest. "This is exactly the kind of forward thinking we need." The way Claudia's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the mahogany table should have been my warning. The slight narrowing of her eyes as her husband praised my work. The way she whispered something to her personal assistant, who immediately started typing on her phone. I'd seen Claudia destroy careers for less than her husband's professional admiration. "How refreshing," Claudia interjected, her voice dripping honey over poison. Such enthusiasm from someone so new to this level of finance. "Where did you say you worked before Asterion, dear?" "Primarily in Cleveland and Columbus," I replied evenly, meeting her gaze. "Regional firms, but solid experience in market analysis." "Regional." She smiled, letting the word hang in the air like a slur. "How wonderfully quaint." The other executives shifted uncomfortably. Marcus Chen, our CFO, actually winced. Everyone knew Claudia's interrogations were rarely about gathering information. They were about establishing dominance. Over the following weeks, her scrutiny intensified. She'd appear at my desk unannounced, asking questions about my personal life with the subtlety of a predator circling prey. Did I have family in Chicago? Was I seeing anyone? How did I afford that new laptop bag? It was Coach, hardly extravagant, but she studied it like evidence in a criminal trial. My colleagues began distancing themselves. Sarah from compliance, who used to grab lunch with me, suddenly had perpetual meetings. Tom from legal stopped his friendly morning check-ins. The whispers started, nothing concrete, just enough to poison the air. Claudia's got her eye on Rhodes. "Did you see how Richard looks at her? She's pretty ambitious for someone from nowhere." The truth was, Richard had never been anything but professional. Yes, he valued my work, but the man barely looked up from his phone during our interactions. The narrative Claudia was spinning existed entirely in her own jealous imagination, fed by 20 years of marriage to a man who treated relationships like business transactions. I tried to navigate it carefully, becoming even more reserved, dressing more conservatively, declining any meeting that wasn't absolutely necessary. But Claudia had already decided I was a threat. In her world of charity galas and country club politics, younger women were always threats, especially ones who dared to excel in her husband's domain without her permission. The IT department mysteriously audited my computer twice in 1 month. HR suddenly needed to verify my employment history. My keycard failed randomly, forcing me to wait at security while they fixed the glitch. Each inconvenience was small enough to seem coincidental, but the pattern was clear. Claudia was building a case. "You should be careful," Marcus warned me one evening when we were both working late. He'd found me in the break room, staring at the coffee machine like it held answers. "I've seen this before. When Claudia decides someone is a problem, they become one." "I haven't done anything wrong," I said, though we both knew that was irrelevant. Jennifer from Bonds hadn't done anything wrong either. Neither had Ashley from Risk Management. Or that consultant Richard hired 2 years ago. What was her name? "They're all gone now." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Claudia has ways of making things true that weren't true before." I wanted to tell him that Claudia had no idea who she was dealing with, that I had resources she couldn't imagine, connections that would make her social circle look like a suburban book club. But maintaining my cover was more important than pride. I needed to understand this world from the inside, to see how power worked when it thought no one was watching. Still, As I walked to my apartment that night, passing the homeless veterans Claudia's charity claimed to support while spending 90% on administrative costs, I felt the anger building. These people played with lives like poker chips, destroyed careers over imagined slights, crushed anyone who threatened their carefully maintained hierarchies. They had no idea they'd chosen the wrong target. The company holiday party should have been a warning, held at the Peninsula Hotel's ballroom. It was Asterian's annual display of corporate excess, ice sculptures, champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's rent, and a jazz quartet flown in from New Orleans. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. A conservative black cocktail dress, minimal jewelry. Nothing that could be construed as trying too hard. I should have known it wouldn't matter. I was standing near the windows, discussing the Federal Reserve's latest decision with a group of analysts, when Claudia approached. She wore a crimson designer gown that probably cost more than a car, diamonds dripping from her ears and throat like frozen tears. The crowd parted for her. They always did. "Emily," she said, loud enough to draw attention. "How lovely you look tonight. Though I'm surprised you're here alone." Again. The conversation around us died. I felt the shift in energy, that peculiar tension when everyone senses blood in the water but pretends not to notice. I prefer to keep my personal and professional lives separate. "Mrs. Halston," I replied calmly. "How modern of you." She stepped closer, and I could smell her perfume, something French and aggressive. Though one has to wonder what kind of personal life requires such discretion. Before I could respond, Richard appeared, touching his wife's elbow gently. "Claudia, Senator Morrison is asking for you." She didn't move. "I'm having a lovely chat with Miss Rhodes about boundaries. So important in the workplace, don't you think?" "Darling?" Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Indeed, Emily, excellent work on the Singapore presentation today." That was it. That single compliment, delivered in front of his wife, sealed my fate. I saw it in Claudia's eyes, the final verdict being rendered. 3 days later, it happened. I arrived at work at my usual time, 7:45 a.m., to find security guards standing by my desk. My personal items were already in a box, my Ohio State mug, the small succulent I'd kept alive for 2 years, the photo of my mother I kept tucked behind my monitor. Colleagues were already at their desks, pretending to work while obviously watching the scene unfold. "Miss Rhodes," the head of security said, not unkindly, "please come with us." "What's going on?" I asked, though the box told me everything. "Management will explain." They escorted me to a conference room where Claudia sat at the head of the table, flanked by HR Director Patricia Wells and, surprisingly, Richard himself. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Emily," Claudia began, savoring every syllable, "it's come to our attention that you've been engaging in inappropriate conduct that violates Asterian's code of ethics." "What conduct?" I kept my voice steady, though my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage. Patricia cleared her throat nervously. "There have been complaints about inappropriate advances towards senior management, creating a hostile work environment." "That's a lie." I looked directly at Richard. "You know that's a lie." He studied his hands like they contained the secrets of the universe. Claudia smiled. "Several employees have come forward with concerns about your behavior, your obvious attempts to leverage personal relationships for professional gain. It's unseemly and, frankly, pathetic." "Who complained?" I demanded. "I have the right to know my accusers." "The complaints were made confidentially to protect the victims," Patricia said, reading from a clearly prepared script. "Victims?" They were calling themselves victims. "This is wrongful termination," I said. "I'll sue." "You're welcome to try." Claudia laughed. Actually laughed. "Though I think you'll find our legal team quite thorough. And really, dear, who would believe you, a nobody from Ohio trying to sleep her way to the top? Bitter when it didn't work out? The story writes itself." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "Security will escort you out now," Your final paycheck will be mailed, minus the cost of the company property you damaged. I haven't damaged anything. The laptop you returned last month had coffee damage. $1,200. She moved toward the door, then paused. A word of advice? This industry is smaller than you think. I'd consider a career change, perhaps something more suitable to your background. Retail. Perhaps. The walk to the elevator was the longest of my life. Security flanked me like I was a criminal while hundreds of eyes tracked my progression. Some looked sympathetic, others smugly satisfied, but most just seemed relieved it wasn't them. At the elevator, they made me surrender my key card and company phone. The security guard handed me my box of possessions, avoiding eye contact. As the elevator doors closed, I heard Claudia's voice carrying across the floor. This is what happens when we lower our standards. People, let this be a lesson. Standing on the sidewalk, holding my pathetic box while Christmas shoppers streamed around me, I felt something inside me crystallize into pure, cold purpose. They thought they'd destroyed me. They thought I'd slink back to Ohio, defeated and humiliated. They had no idea what they'd just started. I walked back to my apartment in a daze, still carrying that pathetic box. The doorman at my building, a modest high-rise, nothing flashy, gave me a sympathetic nod. He'd seen this walk of shame before. Chicago's Loop District was full of the professionally wounded, carrying their desk plants and coffee mugs home in the middle of the day. Once inside my apartment, I set the box down and stood at my window, looking out at the city skyline. Asterian's tower gleamed in the distance, all that glass and steel hiding so much rot. For 3 years, I'd played their game, pretended to be small, ordinary, struggling. The funny thing was, I'd actually started to believe my own cover story sometimes, living on a mid-level manager's salary, watching every expense, calculating whether I could afford a new winter coat. It had been its own kind of education. But that was over now. I walked to my bedroom closet and pushed aside the clothes until I reached the back wall. Behind a loose panel I'd discovered when I moved in was a small safe. Not my only one, but the most important. Inside were 3 things: my mother's death certificate, a USB drive containing every document related to my inheritance, and a single business card with just a phone number. My attorney, the one who'd handled the sale of my shares, the one who knew exactly who I really was. My mother, Rebecca Rhodes, had been a programmer in the early days of Silicon Valley. Not the flashy kind who gave TED Talks, but the kind who actually built things. She joined her college roommate's startup in 1999, writing code for 18 hours a day in a garage that smelled like pizza and ambition. When they offered her salary or equity, she took equity. 10% of a company no one had heard of. Developing search algorithms everyone said would never compete with Yahoo. She never told me the details while she was alive. We lived modestly in Ohio, where she'd returned after leaving Silicon Valley, wanting a normal life for me. She worked as a computer science professor at Ohio State, drove a Honda Accord, clipped coupons, even when she got sick, a rare autoimmune disease that ate away at her for 2 years. She insisted we had enough. I thought she meant her professor's pension and the small life insurance policy. Then the lawyers called. The startup she'd helped build had been acquired by Google for $2 billion in a deal that made headlines in the tech world, but meant nothing to me until they explained what her 10% meant. After taxes, after everything, I was worth just over $200 million. The roommate turned CEO had protected my mother's shares through every funding round, every dilution attempt, honoring a promise made in that garage decades ago. Your mother never wanted the money to change you. Her lawyer had told me. She wanted you to choose your own path. So I had. I'd chosen to understand the other side of wealth, the institutional kind, the generational kind, the kind that Claudia Halston wore like armor. And now, they'd given me a reason to use every cent of my inheritance to teach them a lesson. I picked up the business card and dialed. Marcus Brennan's office. A crisp voice answered. This is Emily Rhodes. I need to speak with Marcus immediately. Ms. Rhodes, he's in a meeting. Tell him the full portfolio is now active. He'll understand. 2 minutes later, Marcus was on the line. Emily, I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Is everything all right? I need you to initiate the contingency structure we discussed. All of it. There was a pause. Marcus Brennan wasn't just any attorney. He was a former SEC prosecutor who'd switched sides and now specialized in corporate warfare for ultra-high net worth individuals. He knew exactly what my wealth could do when properly deployed. May I ask what's prompted this acceleration? Asterion Capital just made a very expensive mistake. I see. I could hear him shifting into strategic mode. We'll need to move carefully. Your invisible status has been your greatest asset. That phase is over. I want you to begin acquiring Asterion shares through the shell companies. Quietly at first, but aggressive enough to accumulate a significant position within 3 months. That could require 50 to 60 million, depending on market. I'm authorizing up to 100 million for the acquisition phase. Whatever it takes to get me a seat at their table. Another pause. Emily, hostile takeovers are complex, especially against an established firm like Asterion. They'll have poison pills, defensive measures. They also have secrets, Marcus. Everyone does at that level. I want a full investigative team, forensic accountants, private investigators, whoever you trust. I spent 3 years inside that building. I know where to tell them to look. This could get expensive. I almost laughed. Marcus, they humiliated me in front of 300 people. They tried to destroy my reputation to protect a jealous woman's ego. They think I'm nobody. The expense is not my concern. Understood. I'll have my team ready to move within 48 hours. We'll need to establish operational security. Use the Lake Forest property as base of operations. It was a mansion I'd bought through an LLC, never visited, kept just in case. And Marcus, I want everything they've ever hidden, every offshore account, every SEC violation they've skirted, every deal that wouldn't survive scrutiny. Everything. That's a declaration of war. Emily. I looked at my reflection in the window, superimposed over the city lights. They fired the first shot. They just didn't know who they were shooting at. The Lake Forest mansion became my war room. Marcus had assembled a team that looked more like an intelligence operation than a legal offensive. Former FBI forensic accountants, private investigators who specialized in corporate espionage, data analysts who could find patterns in seemingly random numbers, and a hacker, though Marcus insisted we call him a digital security consultant, who went only by Tower. Your 3 years inside gives us an advantage, Marcus said during our first full team meeting. We sat around a dining table that had been converted into a command center, laptops and documents spreading across its polished surface. Tell us where to look. I pulled out a tablet where I'd mapped Asterion's structure from memory. Start with the Cayman accounts. They run everything through a subsidiary called Asterion Global Holdings. Supposedly it's for tax efficiency, but Richard makes too many trips to Georgetown for it to be that simple. Tower looked up from his screen. Banking records are tough, but email traffic about banking records, that's doable. There's more, I continued. They have a real estate investment trust that's been acquiring properties in Detroit and Baltimore, distressed assets, supposedly for redevelopment. But I processed some of those acquisitions. The numbers never added up. They were paying 30% above market value for buildings that were basically worthless. The forensic accountant, a woman named Dana who'd helped prosecute Enron executives, made a note. Classic washing machine, buy high from yourself, claim the loss, move the money offshore. The Senator Morrison connection that Claudia mentioned at the party. That's another thread. His campaign received massive donations from Asterion employees. Employees who coincidentally received bonuses exactly matching those donation amounts the day before. Structured campaign finance violations, Marcus said, smiling slightly. The FBI loves those. Over the next 6 weeks, my team worked with surgical precision. Tower penetrated Asterion's email servers, careful to leave no trace. Dana traced shell companies through 7 countries, unraveling a web of financial manipulation that made my stomach turn. The private investigators surveilled key players, documenting meetings that didn't appear on any official calendars. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. "You need to see this," Tower said one morning, pulling up a series of documents on the main screen. I was going through deleted emails from Richard's account. "Deleted emails can be recovered." He gave me a look that suggested I'd asked if water was wet. "Everything can be recovered. But look at this exchange with someone named Gregory Winters." The name made my blood run cold. Gregory Winters had been Asterian's CFO before Marcus took over. He'd died in a boating accident 2 years ago. Except these emails were from 6 months after his supposed death. "He's alive?" I asked. "Very much so. Living in Switzerland under a different name." And look what he was discussing with Richard. The emails detailed a massive fraud. Asterian had been creating phantom investments, selling them to pension funds and municipal governments, using new investor money to pay returns to old investors. A classic Ponzi scheme, but sophisticated enough to pass audits because Gregory had been manipulating the books from the outside while appearing to be dead. "This is it," Marcus said quietly. "This isn't just fraud, it's conspiracy. Wire fraud, possibly murder fraud if they faked his death for insurance money. This brings down everyone." "How much did they steal?" I asked. Dana pulled up her calculations. "Conservative estimate, 400 million. Could be as high as 600 million. I thought about the pension funds, teachers, firefighters, regular people who'd trusted their retirements to Asterian. All to fund Richard's yacht collection and Claudia's charity galas where she could play queen. "We need more than emails," I said. "We need Gregory himself." "Already on it," the lead investigator said. "We've located him in Zurich. He's nervous, paranoid, might be willing to flip for the right incentive." "Offer him immunity consultation," I said. "I'll pay for the best lawyers in Switzerland. Make it clear he can cooperate with us and the authorities, or we deliver everything we have to Interpol and let them sort it out." While my team worked on Gregory, I executed Phase 2. Through 17 different shell companies, I'd been accumulating Asterion stock. Not enough to trigger SEC notifications, I kept each entity below the 5% threshold, but, collectively, I now owned 12% of the company. Enough to demand a board seat. Enough to access internal documents. Enough to be in the room when everything collapsed. The call from Gregory came at 3 a.m. Chicago time. "I'll testify," he said without preamble. His voice was rough, scared. "But I want protection. Real protection. Richard has connections you don't understand. You'll have it, I promised. Private security until you're in federal custody. After that, witness protection if necessary." "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Who are you?" "Someone who understands that people like Richard and Claudia think they're untouchable. I'm here to prove they're wrong." He laughed bitterly. "Claudia. She's the one who suggested faking my death. Said it would be cleaner than having me just disappear." Another piece of evidence, another nail in their coffin. Marcus looked at me across the war room table. "We have enough, more than enough. Do you want to give them a chance to negotiate, or—" "No negotiations," I said firmly. They didn't give me one. We go to the FBI, the SEC, and the press simultaneously. Complete destruction. "When?" I thought about Claudia's sneer, Richard's cowardice, the box of my belongings, the security escort. "Next Monday, during their quarterly board meeting, I want them to feel safe, comfortable, right until the moment their world ends." The Monday board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. By 8:45, I was already in the building, not sneaking in, but walking through the main entrance with a visitor's badge that said, Rhodes Holdings, LLC. The security guard who'd escorted me out 3 months ago did a double take but said nothing. I was dressed differently now, a $5,000 suit I'd never have worn during my employee days, subtle jewelry that whispered rather than shouted wealth, and an expression that suggested I belonged here more than anyone else. "Ma'am, the board meeting is restricted." A junior executive tried to intercept me. Check the shareholder registry, I said calmly. Rhodes Holdings and its affiliated entities, 12.3% ownership as of market close Friday. His face went pale as he typed into his tablet. Major shareholders had walk-in rights to board meetings. It was in Asterian's own bylaws. The boardroom was exactly as I remembered. Overwhelming views of Chicago, that massive mahogany table, the subtle power plays in where everyone sat. Richard was at the head, naturally, with Claudia in her unofficial position to his right. The board members were already assembled, 7 men and 2 women who'd gotten rich by looking the other way. Richard saw me first. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "Emily." His voice cracked slightly. "Ms. Rhodes," I corrected, taking an empty seat at the table. "Representing Rhodes Holdings' interests." Claudia's face cycled through confusion, rage, and something approaching fear. "Security," she barked. This woman was terminated. "From employment, yes. But you can't terminate a major shareholder." I placed my portfolio on the table. "Shall we begin?" "This is highly irregular." The board chairman, William Ashford, blustered. How did I accumulate 12% of your company in 3 months? Carefully, legally, and with tremendous purpose." I opened my portfolio. "But before we discuss quarterly projections, I think the board should be aware of some developments." Richard found his voice. "Whatever game you're playing." "Game." I pulled out my phone, checking the time. "In approximately 10 minutes, the FBI will be serving warrants at this office, your home in Winnetka, Richard, and that lovely estate in the Hamptons, Claudia. The SEC Enforcement Division is particularly interested in your creative accounting practices." The room erupted, board members shouting, demanding explanations, threatening to leave. I remained seated, calm. "Additionally," I continued, raising my voice just enough to cut through the chaos. "The Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and Chicago Tribune are running simultaneous stories in their digital editions at 9 a.m. That's in..." I checked my phone again. 4 minutes. "You vindictive little bitch." Claudia snarled, starting to rise from her chair. "Sit down, Claudia." My voice was ice. "You're going to want to hear this next part." She sat, probably from shock more than obedience. "Gregory Winters sends his regards, by the way. From Federal Protective Custody. He's been remarkably helpful in explaining how you suggested staging his death to cover the pension fund theft. The FBI found that particularly interesting." Richard's face had gone gray. "Gregory is dead." "No. Richard. He's very much alive and very talkative. $400 million in fraudulent investments traced through 17 shell companies, all leading back to accounts you personally control. Though I'm sure you'll try to blame subordinates, it's what men like you always do." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see black SUVs pulling up to the building's entrance. "That would be the FBI now." William Ashford stood abruptly. "I need to call my lawyer." "You all should." I agreed. "Though you might have trouble reaching them. Seems the U.S. Attorney's office has been busy this morning, issuing subpoenas to every major law firm that's represented Asterian board members." My phone buzzed. 9 a.m. Exactly. And there are the news stories. Shall I read the Journal's headline? "Asterian Capital Executives Indicted in $400 million Fraud Scheme." They did excellent work with the information provided to them. Very thorough. Claudia's phone was ringing incessantly. She looked at the screen, her face growing paler with each missed call. "The club, the charity board, they're all distancing themselves?" "Yes, I imagine so. Financial fraud is one thing, but suggesting the murder of a CFO? That's rather beyond the pale, even for your social circle." The boardroom door burst open. FBI agents flooded in, badges visible, weapons holstered but present. The lead agent looked directly at Richard. "Richard Halston, you're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Claudia Halston, you're under arrest for conspiracy and fraud." He continued reading rights as other agents moved toward board members. As they cuffed Richard, he looked at me with a mixture of hatred and bewilderment. Why? You were nobody. Just some manager from Ohio. I stood, gathering my portfolio with deliberate calm. My mother was nobody too. A professor who clipped coupons and drove a used Honda. But she was also brilliant, and loyal, and worth more than your entire empire. She taught me that money without purpose is meaningless. But money with purpose? I smiled. That can change everything. Claudia was sobbing now as they cuffed her, mascara streaming down her cheeks. You've destroyed everything. 40 years of building. You destroyed yourselves the moment you decided other people were disposable. I just made sure you faced consequences. As they led them out, I turned to the remaining board members who hadn't been arrested. Yet, Rhodes Holdings will be calling for a complete restructuring of Asterian's leadership. I suggest you cooperate fully with authorities. The employees' pension fund will be restored from the executive's seized assets. And Claudia? I called after her as they reached the door. Retail work is actually honest work. You wouldn't last a day. The press conference was held at the Fairmont Hotel, 3 blocks from Asterian's tower. I hadn't planned on speaking publicly. But Marcus convinced me that controlling the narrative was essential. The room was packed. Financial journalists, cable news crews, bloggers who covered corporate scandals. They smelled blood in the water. And they weren't wrong. I stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of cameras and skeptical faces. 3 months ago, I'd been escorted from a building like a criminal. Now, those who'd witnessed my humiliation were either in federal custody or desperately calling their lawyers. Good afternoon. My name is Emily Rhodes. Until recently, I was a strategic development manager at Asterian Capital, terminated under false pretenses by executives who are now facing federal charges for defrauding investors of over $400 million. The cameras clicked furiously. A CNN reporter raised her hand immediately. Ms. Rhodes, Richard Halston's attorney claims you orchestrated a vindictive campaign based on a workplace dispute. How do you respond? I respond with facts, I said evenly. Gregory Winters, Asterian's supposedly deceased CFO, is alive and cooperating with federal authorities. The FBI has documented evidence of systematic fraud spanning 5 years. This isn't about vindication, it's about justice for the pension funds, the municipal investments, the thousands of people whose retirements were stolen to fund private jets and charity galas that existed primarily on paper. What's your stake in this? Another reporter called out. You own 12% of a company that's about to be worthless. Asterian isn't worthless. It's legitimate operations, the honest employees who had no knowledge of executive malfeasance, the actual investments that weren't fabricated, those have value. Rhodes Holdings will be proposing a complete restructuring at the emergency shareholder meeting next week. Every penny recovered from the fraud will go to making victims whole. A Wall Street Journal reporter I recognized stood up. Ms. Rhodes, public records show Rhodes Holdings was formed just 3 months ago with significant capital. Where did that funding come from? This was the moment, the reveal I'd debated with Marcus for hours. My mother was Rebecca Rhodes, an early developer at Quantum Search Technologies. When Google acquired Quantum in 2008, her 10% stake was worth over $200 million after taxes. She never touched it, living as a computer science professor in Ohio until her death 4 years ago. I inherited not just her assets, but her belief that wealth should serve a purpose. The room went silent for a moment, then erupted, everyone shouting questions at once. I raised my hand for quiet. I took a job at Asterian to understand institutional finance from the inside. I watched how power protects itself, how corruption hides behind respectability, how people like Claudia Halston can destroy careers on a whim while stealing millions. When they fired me for the crime of being too competent, too visible, too threatening to an insecure executive's wife, they thought I'd disappear. Instead, I used my resources to expose the truth. So this was revenge? Fox Business asked, almost hopefully. This was justice. Revenge would have been destroying them quietly. Personally, justice means public accountability, criminal prosecution, and restitution for victims. Although, I allowed myself a small smile. I'd be lying if I said I didn't appreciate the poetry of it. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Gregory just gave FBI location of hidden accounts. Another 200 meters, located. I've just received word that federal authorities have located an additional 200 million in hidden accounts based on whistleblower testimony. That brings the total recovered to nearly the entire amount stolen. What about the employees who've lost their jobs because of this scandal? A local Chicago reporter asked. Any employee not implicated in the fraud will receive full severance plus a settlement from the victim's restitution fund. Additionally, Rhodes Holdings is establishing a placement service to help them find new positions. The honest employees are victims too. Ms. Rhodes, a veteran financial reporter from Bloomberg, stood up. You're 32 years old with no prior experience running a major firm. Why should shareholders trust you to restructure Asterion? Because I'm not asking to run it. I'm asking to dismantle the corrupt structure and rebuild it with transparency. We'll bring in new leadership from outside, implement oversight that actually works. And most importantly, remember that we're managing other people's money, not playing with our personal piggy bank. As the questions continued, I saw a familiar face at the back of the room. Marcus from the old office, not my lawyer, but the CFO who'd warned me about Claudia. He nodded slightly, a gesture of respect from someone who'd survived by keeping his head down while others were destroyed. Last question, I announced. What's next for you personally? A young reporter asked. Will you stay in finance? I thought about my mother, how she'd walked away from Silicon Valley billions to teach college students in Ohio, finding purpose in smaller things. But I also thought about the thousands of employees at firms like Asterion, good people trapped in corrupt systems. I'm establishing a foundation focused on corporate accountability and whistleblower protection, because what happened at Asterion is happening elsewhere. The only difference is, this time, someone had the resources to fight back. As I left the podium, my phone showed 53 text messages, 27 missed calls, and emails from every major financial firm in the country. Some offering positions, some threatening lawsuits, some begging for mercy as they wondered what else I might know. But the only message that mattered was from the U.S. attorney. Both Halstons denied bail. Flight risk, assets frozen. Thank you. 6 months later, I stood on the observation deck of the Willis Tower, looking out at Chicago's sprawling landscape. The city looked different now, not physically, but in what it represented. Asterion Capital's building was still there, though the logo had been removed. The company had been restructured, renamed, with new leadership and legitimate operations. The victims had been made whole. Every stolen dollar returned with interest from seized assets. Richard Halston got 25 years federal time. He tried to flip on everyone, including his wife, but the evidence was too overwhelming. Claudia received 15 years, though her lawyers were appealing. The photo of her in handcuffs had made the cover of Vanity Fair with the headline, "The Fall of American Aristocracy." I'd heard she was teaching literacy classes in federal prison, which might have been the first honest work she'd ever done. Gregory Winters testified for 3 weeks straight, unraveling decades of financial manipulation. In exchange for his cooperation, he got 5 years minimum security and would likely serve 2. Some said that wasn't enough. They were probably right. But without him, dozens of other corrupt executives would still be stealing retirements. The media painted me as everything from a hero to a villain. The billionaire vigilante. One documentary called me Corporate America's Worst Nightmare, said another. The truth was simpler and more complex. I was just someone who'd inherited the power to fight back and chose to use it. Marcus Brennan called while I was still on the observation deck. The Foundation's approved, full 501c3 status. The Rhodes Foundation for Corporate Accountability is officially operational. How many applications for the whistleblower fund? 47 in the first hour after announcement. Emily, you've started something here. Maybe I had. Or maybe I just finished something my mother started when she chose equity over salary in that Silicon Valley garage, believing in value beyond immediate gratification. I left Chicago the next morning, not in defeat like they'd intended, but on my own terms. The movers had already taken what little I wanted from the apartment, mostly photographs and my mother's things. The expensive suit I'd worn to the board meeting that day went to charity. I kept the Ohio State mug. There were offers, board positions, speaking engagements, book deals. Hollywood wanted to make a movie. I turned them all down. That wasn't why I'd done this. The moment it became about fame or glory, I'd be no different from Claudia, just playing a different game. Instead, I drove back to Ohio, to my mother's small house that I'd never sold. It needed work, new roof, updated kitchen, probably a complete renovation. But it was honest work, real work, the kind where you could see what you'd built at the end of the day. My phone rang constantly those first few weeks. Journalists, lawyers, people with their own stories of corporate abuse. I helped when I could, directed them to resources, sometimes wrote checks. But mostly, I learned to live quietly again. Like my mother had. The local news ran a segment about my return. Local woman takes down Wall Street giant. The grocery store clerk recognized me, as did the librarian, the coffee shop owner. But within a month, I was just Emily again, the one who helped renovate the community center, who taught coding at the library on weekends, who drove a reasonable car and lived in a normal house. One evening, as I was reviewing foundation applications, an email arrived from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Thank you. Ms. Rhodes, you don't know me, but I was a janitor at Asterion for 15 years. My pension was supposed to be my security, my dignity in old age. When the news broke about the fraud, I thought I'd lost everything. Today, I received the full amount plus damages. Because of you. I can retire with dignity. Because of you. They learned we matter too. Thank you." I read it 3 times, then saved it in a folder with hundreds of similar messages. These were why I'd fought. Not for revenge, though I won't lie. Watching Claudia sob as they led her away had been satisfying. But for the thousands of invisible people who cleaned offices, managed spreadsheets, answered phones, and trusted their futures to men like Richard Halston. Standing in my mother's garden that night, I thought about power and purpose, about the strange journey from a cubicle to a boardroom, to a courtroom, to this quiet place. The newspapers called it the most dramatic corporate takedown in American history. The politicians used it to grandstand about reform. The business schools turned it into case studies. But for me, it was simpler. They thought I was nobody. Just another disposable employee from nowhere special. They were wrong about the nobody part. Everybody is somebody to someone. But they were right about one thing. I was from nowhere special. And that, it turned out, had made all the difference. The garden needed work too. Tomorrow, I'd start on that. Real work, honest work, the kind my mother would have appreciated. The 200 million that had terrified me 4 years ago now felt like tools in a shed. Powerful when needed, but not the point of living. As for Asterion, the Halstons, the whole glittering, vicious world of Chicago finance, that chapter was closed. They'd learned that sometimes the person you step on has the means to step back. Sometimes the nobody from Ohio has a secret worth more than your entire empire. Sometimes justice actually wins. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of corporate justice and revenge, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Emily's position? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to hit that notification bell for more stories like this one.